When you live your life so publicly, it's really easy for us to forget the incredible private pressure that comes with it. So today, we're going to dive into what Kim Kardashian herself has described as one of the hardest times in her life, using her own words to really understand the unseen toll of her very public divorce. And that quote right there, it really sets the stage for everything. It's just a raw admission that behind all the headlines and the cameras, there was a huge personal crisis going on, one that would pretty soon start to physically show up on her own skin. You know, we all feel stress, right? But it's a whole other level when your body literally starts wearing that stress for the entire world to see. So psoriasis is one of those things. It's an autoimmune condition, and it's famously triggered by major stress. For Kim, seeing it come back was like this huge physical alarm bell, basically signaling that the internal pressure had just hit a breaking point. And what's so powerful here is that she connects the dots herself. It wasn't just some random flare-up. She says she could literally feel it coming as that stress just kept building and building. This creates a direct line between her emotional state and her physical health. So what was causing all this overwhelming stress? Well, at the very heart of all her anxiety, it really all boiled down to one single powerful instinct. She had to shield her children from the public drama that was just escalating around their father. And that just tells you everything, right? Her absolute number one priority. It wasn't about managing her own feelings or even the public story. It was all about creating a safe harbor for her kids right in the middle of a storm. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. In a world where your kids can see anything with just one click, her main job became information control, trying to build this reality for her kids that was safe and stable, while a completely different, much more chaotic reality was playing out for everyone to see online. And this is the moment that protective bubble she'd built just bursts, the moment she realized she couldn't hide it from them anymore. And you can imagine that was a huge turning point, where the stress of the whole situation just went through the roof. Okay, so besides trying to protect her kids, there was this other huge source of stress, and that was the massive gap between the kind of co-parenting relationship she had hoped for and the one she was actually living. So you've got this vision on one side, inspired by her own parents, family dinners, co-parenting from the house next door, creating, quote, the best healthy relationships. But then you look at the reality, and it's just a completely different story. Public accusations that she was keeping the kids when she's saying he hadn't even called. It was this constant, confusing whiplash. You can just feel the frustration in that statement, can't you? While this really dramatic story was being told publicly, the reality, according to her, was much, much simpler. They were right where they'd always been. So all this emotional chaos, it led her to use a really powerful and honestly a pretty surprising term to describe how she was feeling. She's talking about Stockholm Syndrome. Now, if you're not familiar, it's this really complex psychological thing where someone who's a captive starts to feel, positive feelings for their captor, almost identifying with them. For her to use that specific term to talk about her own feelings, wow, that is incredibly revealing, right? It points to this really deep, almost built-in sense of responsibility to protect her ex-husband, even when his actions were the ones causing her pain. She just felt this compulsion to help him, to shield him. But this whole period, it was a major turning point. For the first time, she started to feel that sense of obligation, that need to protect him, was starting to fade. She was finally moving toward protecting herself and her kids. But the stress that had built up had already done some serious damage. And that brings us to the climax of this whole thing, the moment all that invisible stress became very, very real and, frankly, terrifying. So, what's the actual physical price you pay for that kind of constant, high-stakes pressure? Well, the answer turned up in a doctor's office. She goes in for an MRI, just trying to get some answers about what's happening inside her body after months of this relentless stress. And the result? A brain aneurysm. A tiny, balloon-like bulge on a blood vessel in her brain. I mean, this is a potentially life-threatening condition. It just shows you how severe the physical toll of all this emotional turmoil really was. So this health scare was a huge wake-up call, but it didn't change the basic truth of her situation. There was no easy way out. Because they have 4 kids together, their lives are always going to be connected. She can't just walk away and cut all ties. And that means the source of all that stress is a permanent part of her life, something she has to manage, not just get rid of. So her story is it's a really stark look at the human cost of living out something so painful on a global stage. And it kind of makes you ask, right? When someone's private struggle becomes our public entertainment, who's the one that really ends up paying the price?